Lego Star Wars, a theme with some of the most detailed and beautiful and unique figures I feel like out of the entirety of Lego, but also a theme where there are some glaring errors and just corners cut and overall disappointment. So today I wanted to take a look at some of the minifigures and characters that I feel like could be upgraded, some of which can be upgraded by just simply swapping out 1 or 2 pieces, and others that will require a lot of changes, so much so that I will have to Photoshop them and show you what we could have had as the perfect figure. As today we'll be taking a look at these 11 characters and upgrading them to make them the best possible versions of them that we can, and give them the attention and detail that I personally feel like Lego Star Wars deserves. I mean, you know, it's one of Lego's best ever selling themes. Come on guys, let's get it together. Starting off is Han Solo from the carbon freezing chamber, and this upgrade simply just transforms this figure into a completely different catalogued figure entirely, that being the version of this character from the Betrayal at Cloud City set, as well as the Desert Scarif Escape. Now, the simple thing to do is literally just swap out Han Solo's hair to the more modern version, considering this hairpiece just looks atrocious. You can order these hairpieces off Bricks and Pieces, you can also just get them in currently the Millennium Falcon Microfighter. Han Solo's been around for a couple of years now with this hairpiece, so it's really simple to sort of upgrade him and make your 2016 version a more modern, updated version that, you know, actually looks like Harrison Ford and Han Solo. Very simple. I mean, realistically, you don't really need to do this either. You can always just buy the figure outright, but you know, just in case you don't, there you go. Next up, we have old Obi-Wan Kenobi, and this one isn't necessarily an upgrade either, but more of just sort of an alternate look. Of course, you can have the old Ben from the Obi-Wan Kenobi's hut scene, where he doesn't even have the cape and he has this hairpiece, but personally, I feel like that hairpiece doesn't necessarily work. I actually think that the light bluish gray version of the Peter Venkman hair is a tiny bit more accurate. So in order to show you guys this, I've taken my Obi-Wan from the Mos Eisley set, and I'm just gonna swap out his hair here in order to give him an alternate look, just in case you don't want the hood, or even if you don't want the cape, you could just take this off and have him look like this instead. I feel like it's a lot more accurate because Obi-Wan in A New Hope had really messy, sort of tousled hair. It was slightly balding even as well, so I feel like this one just looks a lot more accurate than that good old classic early 2000s comb-over piece. Next up is Finn from everyone's favorite Star Wars movie, The Rise of Skywalker. And overall, I feel like this figure is pretty good. The only thing that I want to change is his hair, because these days there is a much better piece. I remember when I first got this figure, I thought the hair was a bit too curly and stuck out a bit too much. Honestly, I preferred the Force Awakens hair for him, but there's actually a brand new hairpiece, which is much more readily available than it has been the last couple of months and is going to look so much better. And that is actually the hairpiece from the T'Challa as Star-Lord from the Marvel CMF. Now, this hair is a lot shorter. It's now in some city sets as well as going to be featured in the upcoming Black Panther mech, and I just feel like just the length of it is a lot more accurate and looks a lot more like John Boyega in the films. So there you go, there's how to upgrade him. I still feel like his face is a bit too happy. I mean, John Boyega was quite an excited character, I mean, playing Finn, but Finn's usually quite an excitable character, but I don't know, I just don't personally like this head all too much, so you could swap that out as well, but I feel like the hair for me was the bigger issue here. Moving along, and next up we have Ahsoka, and Ahsoka, unfortunately, we can't really do much in real life to fix her. However, using Photoshop, I wanted to show you guys how much better she would look if she was that tiny bit more accurate. Now, the big issue that I have is with her Leku. Firstly, this is using the Rebels piece, which is a lot longer. Ahsoka wasn't as old as she was in that show in the final season of the Clone Wars. It just doesn't quite look right. I mean, it still looks good for the minifigure, but it would have been nice to have a new piece. So first things first is I'm just going to chop off some of that extra length to make it a tiny bit more accurate. I feel like the height in her head is all right, ideally maybe just a tiny bit smaller, but I feel like the bigger issue is the front. The next thing, of course, as well is her little sort of silver crown thing. It definitely should be printed a tiny bit closer to the edge of the piece rather than up so high, but I feel like hopefully that was just due to Lego's printing implications and the way that those machines are set up, though considering that all the detailing of the blue sort of wraps around here, it makes me think that this could have been placed down just a tiny bit lower and actually sort of wrap around the edge of her hair, but since it wasn't, we're just gonna quickly slide that down and make it a tiny bit more accurate. I really hope that hopefully if we ever get a Mandalorian version of Ahsoka or even a TV show of a version of Ahsoka, that we do get a new mold for this piece, because while I think that this is passable and still looks amazing on the minifigure, I would much rather a more accurate and updated version. Up next from The Phantom Menace, we have Padme, and overall, I think this figure is really good. I love the fact that we've now got the mid legs because I think this looks so much better on her, but my main issue with this figure that I feel like really takes away from it is the face. I mean, in general, Natalie Portman has a very, very young face, let alone in this movie where she was still a child. So one thing that I actually want to do is swap it out with Hermione Granger's face from Harry Potter. While I definitely think the legs are a lot more accurate and sort of just completely forgetting the whole Harry Potter aging timeline, I just feel like this face works so much better considering how young Natalie Portman looks and how youthful she is, especially considering the face she is using is used on people like Black Widow, who is played by Scarlett Johansson and is considerably older than Natalie Portman was in this film. I also feel like the facial expressions and sort of just the age detailing looks a tiny bit better on this version, and it still matches the character of Padme overall. And then sort of as you get to Attack of the Clones, I feel like that's where you'd want to use this headpiece a tiny bit more. Because at least now she still looks a lot more youthful, but because of the legs, still looks older than Anakin would be. Jumping on over to the TV shows, and we've got the Beskar Mandalorian, and as a whole, I really like this figure. He's incredibly detailed and one of the most detailed Star Wars figures we've gotten in a very long time. I love the arm printing, I love the leg printing, here looks great, it looks spectacular, but the one thing that I've never been able to get over is the color of the helmet. Now, while I understand why it's sort of this really light silver, it's to match sort of the printing and all that, I really feel like the Beskar in the show didn't look as bright and striking as this helmet is. So one thing that I actually want to do is steal the helmet off my Mandalorian from the Razor Crest set and stick that on and sort of dull it down a tiny bit, because honestly I feel like this darker version more accurately represented the Beskar. Now I get it in the sense of like, okay, well you didn't want to use the same helmet twice to sort of represent the Beskar, but I feel like, you know, Lego's either got to introduce a new color at that point or just do something else. But personally I feel like this combination looks so much better. Yes, the helmet doesn't necessarily match the printing on the arms, but I think from a realism point of view and a color point of view, this darker helmet looks a lot more like the Mandalorian does in the show than that lighter version. The only problem is that older version of the Mandalorian is quite expensive, so it's kind of difficult to get your hands on two helmets so that the older version doesn't quite look as messed up. That's something that I've been looking at and hopefully want to achieve someday, but for now I'll just keep the Beskar Mandalorian looking his absolute best. Next up is Han Solo from the 20th anniversary Slave 1 set. Now a better version of this character actually does exist, and it was in the Cloud City Master Builders set. Now unfortunately that set, you know, didn't sell too well and then suddenly became really popular, and like everything Star Wars is now really expensive and has a lot of really expensive figures in it. So if you really wanted to, you could just buy that figure and steal his legs, but unfortunately it's a bit expensive. But I did manage to find these legs in Build a Minifigure that sort of have these like dual molded black boots. It has a lot of sort of like the strap detailing on the belt and the legs and even like laced up. It's got a tiny bit of dirt on the front, and while I don't think that these are perfect, it's definitely a significant upgrade from just the regular sort of front printed legs that we got in that set. The fact that it's dual molded and it's got side leg printing is a huge win, and I feel like it's a very cheap and simple way to upgrade this figure if you don't want to spend the money on that one, or you just want to give that Han Solo just a tiny bit more detailing than he originally had. Next up, we have Hoth Leia, and this is just a very simple one, and the only reason I'm doing this upgrade is because I just want all of my Princess Leias to match, and it's sort of a sign of the times as well, considering this figure was considerably older, or not really considerably, but enough for there to be a difference, and that is purely to swap out her face print. Recently, we've got a ton of classic Leias featuring this more mature face print, which personally I think looks a lot more like Carrie Fisher, and in order to have her match, especially since I've got two of these Leias, is to swap out the face print with the one from Hoth. This face is pretty common these days given how many layers we've gotten since then. It's also now featured on Captain Marvel, so it should be pretty cheap and easy to get a hold of, and that way Leia can firstly look actually like Carrie Fisher, which is a big win, but also she can then match all the other Princess Leia figures you've gotten, probably from the original trilogy, that all have that sort of updated classic face, instead of having a bunch of layers that don't quite look the same. Now for his second appearance, we have Obi-Wan Kenobi, and for the most part, this figure is absolutely perfect, only when in the context of the Jewel of Mustafar set. Now for that set, this figure is absolutely perfect. He is gorgeous, he is amazing, but then Lego went and reused the exact same torso for the General Grievous Starfighter, which doesn't make sense. Obi-Wan's rooms were very clean then, and we all know that because the hello there has become a massive meme that everyone has watched several thousand times. I think we would know. And it's very frustrating because this could have been a very, very simple fix. Yes, it would have cost Lego a lot more money in terms of printing, but it's not like there's a new mold or anything, or that it would take a lot of the graphic designer's time to fix, because it's incredibly easy just to paint out and look like this, which is a much better and more accurate looking Obi-Wan overall for that General Grievous starfighter. Just like Obi-Wan, Anakin had a very similar issue. Now, while I don't have the Anakin from Anakin's Jedi Interceptor, he had the same deal where his ripped up torso was showing up, and this scene is directly from the very beginning of the movie, before he's even battled everyone with his lightsaber, let alone on a giant lava planet, so it just doesn't quite make sense. Now, while the face print on this one is different to the actual one in that set that I feel like is the one that needed to be fixed, I'm just gonna edit this one and show you again how nice and simple and easy. And the funny thing is with these prints as well, it's literally using more ink for them to sort of have the rips on the shirt than it is to not do that at all. It's quite frustrating considering how simple and easy this would have been, and I guess it would have made such a big difference as well. It would have made things more accurate, and especially for the adult collectors, made a lot more people a lot happier. And last but not least is R2-D2. Now, for ages, we have all been asking for a third leg on R2-D2. That little foot at the bottom has been missing. There's no new molds. Even in the UCS R2-D2, just no new mold there. You'd think it would have been the perfect time, but nah, the Lego designers are hopefully still working on that, so I've came up with a version to sort of make my own. Mostly inspired by the Lego Star Wars Skywalker saga, I tried to replicate this and give R2-D2 a third foot so he can actually roam around properly. Now, unfortunately, this version doesn't quite work for play, but if you want to put him on display, it works pretty well. Now, the hardest thing in order to get this third leg to work is the way that R2-D2 is built at the bottom with sort of that axle rod. It makes it really hard to actually get this to work, but I've sort of found a method. Now, all you'll need is 3 pieces, one being these studs with the hole through the center, a white cheese slope, of course, to actually be the foot, and lastly, of all things, is one of these sort of like dinosaur fang teeth pieces. Now, first up, you've got to stick this stud with this little cheese slope here in order to sort of make that foot piece, and then you've got to stick the fang through the center so that it's stiff enough that it sort of all holds itself together like so. You can also use one of those sort of like jewel bar pieces, but I don't know how well it will work. Then lastly, you've got to stick this inside your R2-D2, and as you can see, it doesn't really get stuck. It sort of just rests there. So as you can see, a lot of this upgrade actually just purely relies on gravity. You can't really move R2-D2 around too much because his foot will slide around, but you could sort of set it up and put him on display like so that you've got that third leg. You can still move his body around a tiny bit because as long as that cheese slope is flat with the rest of his feet, it will work perfectly fine. And there you go, R2-D2 finally has a third foot after all these years. So there are all of the upgraded Star Wars figures. Luckily, a lot of these are really simple, cheap, and inexpensive, and nothing too major. It's not like we're combining Cloud City Boba Fett in order to make the most ultimate version, but unfortunately as well, some of them did have to use Photoshop. Hopefully one day Lego will make these beautiful, detailed, full out figures for us that aren't just in super expensive UCS sets, or give us a nice master builder set with a ton of figures that don't have tons of printing. But at least we can still upgrade things in the cases that doesn't happen, just like so. But if you guys enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel down below. And if you haven't checked out my versions of upgrading the Marvel figures or Harry Potter figures or Spider-Man figures, I will leave those links at the end here. And until next time guys, I'll see you later.